The crystal flute tumbled from Diane's grasp the moment her body hit my imported Italian tile. My daughter-in-law's mother, Eleanor, was seizing on my kitchen floor, foam gathering at the edges of her mouth. All I could think was, this wasn't meant for you. Let me explain how a 72-year-old woman found herself watching someone convulse at her own retirement celebration. I've navigated the cutthroat world of pharmaceutical development for nearly 5 decades. You don't survive that environment by being naive. When someone attempts to poison you during your retirement gala, you notice especially when that someone has been eyeing your substantial retirement, packaged like it's the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. 3 hours earlier, my home had buzzed with laughter and congratulations. I just sold my biotech firm for $27 million. Not too shabby for a company I'd built from scratch after my husband passed 12 years ago. Mother, my son Andrew had insisted, you deserve a proper send-off. With those earnest hazel eyes that had worked their magic since childhood, he'd added, let Diane manage everything. Just enjoy yourself for once. I should have grown suspicious when Diane volunteered to host. This woman who complained about loading the dishwasher suddenly transformed into Martha Stewart, arranging flower displays and polishing glassware, as if her future depended on it, which, as events would reveal, it certainly did. The party was impressive, I'll admit. About 40 colleagues, neighbors, and relatives gathered in my renovated Victorian home. Diane had even hired professional staff for the evening. Nothing but the best for you, Victoria, she'd gushed, squeezing my arm with those impeccably manicured nails that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Was chatting with my former research director when I spotted it. Diane standing by the drink table, nervously scanning the room before extracting a tiny vial from her clutch. My blood chilled as she emptied its contents into a specific glass, the one with the barely perceptible chip on the base that I habitually used at gatherings. A reasonable person might have screamed or confronted her immediately, but 5 decades in business taught me that sometimes the most effective strategy is patience. I smiled, nodded at whatever my colleague was saying about industry trends, and observed Diane lifted my doctored champagne and began walking toward me, her face a portrait of artificial concern. Victoria, you seem tired, she said, offering me the flute. Here, have some champagne. You've earned this moment. I accepted the glass, thanked her warmly, and waited. When she became distracted showing off her new tennis bracelet, I quietly exchanged glasses with Eleanor, who was standing nearby looking uncomfortable without refreshment. Eleanor had always been somewhat absent-minded. She grabbed the glass I placed beside her handbag without hesitation. Within minutes, she was commenting on the champagne's unusual aftertaste and wondering aloud if I'd ordered it from some exclusive vineyard. Events unfolded rapidly after that. I knelt beside Eleanor while Diane screamed for someone to call emergency services. Her performance of shocked horror was almost convincing. Almost. But genuine panic and manufactured distress appear distinctly different when you've negotiated with corporate liars for decades. What happened? Andrew demanded, pushing through the gathering crowd. His complexion was ashen, but I detected something else. A fleeting glance toward Diane that lingered a fraction too long. I don't know. Diane sobbed, clutching my arm. She just collapsed. 1 minute she was fine. The next, she gestured helplessly at her mother, now unconscious but still breathing. The paramedics arrived promptly. As they worked on Eleanor, I found myself studying my son's expressions. 35 years of motherhood had taught me to read his emotions like weather patterns. Currently, he resembled someone watching carefully constructed plans disintegrate in real time. Which hospital? I asked the lead paramedic. Central Memorial. Are you family? Close friend, I replied. glancing meaningfully at Diane, who was too busy hyperventilating to notice. "I'll follow in my car." Andrew stepped forward quickly. "Mother, you should stay here. We'll handle everything. You've had enough excitement." How thoughtful. Keep the target at home while they figured out what went wrong with their scheme. "Nonsense," I said firmly. "Eleanor is practically family. I'm coming." I collected my purse and keys before anyone could object off at the hospital. I positioned myself to overhear the medical staff's conversations. Eleanor's condition was classified as acute poisoning, origin unknown. The doctor mentioned something about plant toxins to a nurse specific, enough to suggest someone had researched untraceable substances. Diane paced the waiting room, her designer heels clicking against the linoleum like a metronome counting down her anxiety. Andrew sat rigidly in a plastic chair, his phone constantly vibrating with messages he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is just horrible," Diane repeated for the 6th time. "Poor Mom, I can't understand what happened." I patted her shoulder sympathetically. "These things often remain mysteries, dear. I'm sure the doctors will determine the cause." Then I added, almost casually, "It's fortunate she didn't consume much of that champagne. She'd barely taken a few sips before collapsing." Diane's stride faltered imperceptibly. "Champagne? You think the champagne caused this?" "Oh, I'm sure it's nothing," I said with a dismissive wave. "Just an old woman looking for patterns where none exist." But Diane's face had paled further, and her hands trembled slightly as she reached for her coffee. Andrew was monitoring our conversation with the intensity of a hawk tracking field mice. 4 hours later, a physician emerged to inform us Eleanor was stable, but would require overnight observation. "The tests were inconclusive," he explained. "But whatever she ingested is gradually leaving her system." "Can we see her?" Diane asked. "Family only, and she's heavily sedated. Better to return tomorrow." As we departed, Andrew walked me to my car. "Mother, perhaps you should stay with us tonight. After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone." How considerate, especially since Eleanor's medical emergency had probably left them wondering if I suspected anything. The answer was yes. "Absolutely. That's sweet, darling. But I'll be fine. I have that new security system, remember?" I kissed his cheek and entered my car, watching through my rearview mirror as he and Diane engaged in what appeared to be an urgent whispered conversation in the parking lot. Back home, I poured myself an untainted glass of champagne from a fresh bottle and settled into my study. Time to determine exactly what my loving family had planned for me, and more importantly, what I intended to do about it. I spent the night conducting research, not the kind involving computers and databases, but the variety requiring a clear memory and a skeptical mind. Eleanor's poisoning wasn't random or accidental. Someone had planned to eliminate me at my own celebration, likely hoping to disguise it as a heart attack or stroke. At 72, such incidents occur. No one questions a successful woman's heart failing from the excitement of selling her life's work. But why? That was the $27 million question. I prepared coffee at dawn and sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad, documenting everything I knew about Andrew and Diane's finances. The picture wasn't pretty. Andrew's architectural practice had struggled since the economic downturn, and Diane's jewelry design business generated more expenses than income. They lived extravagantly far beyond their actual earnings. Their mortgage on that ridiculous mansion in Highland Park was triple what they could reasonably afford. The luxury vehicles in their driveway weren't paid off. Diane's shopping habits alone could fund a small nation's infrastructure projects. I'd help them, naturally. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here when Andrew mentioned temporary cash flow problems. The down payment on their house when Diane lamented about wanting to start a family in the right neighborhood. Private school tuition for my granddaughter. Olivia when they insisted public education was inadequate. Reviewing my financial records, I'd provided nearly $240,000 over the past 6 years. Gifts, I'd called them investments in their happiness. Never loans. That would have seemed crass. But now I questioned whether they'd interpreted those gifts differently, not as maternal generosity, but as advances on an inheritance they were impatient to collect. My phone rang at 7:45. Diane calling to check on me. "Victoria, I barely slept thinking about you," she said, her voice heavy with theatrical concern. "After what happened to Mom. I just worry that maybe something was wrong with the food or drinks." "You didn't feel ill at all, did you?" How thoughtful of her to verify whether her poison had reached its intended target. "Not at all, dear. I feel perfectly fine." "Have you heard anything more about Eleanor?" "The doctors say she can probably go home today. They think she might have taken something that disagreed with her before the party. You know how she is with her medications. She probably mixed pills on an empty stomach." Eleanor Carlson was many things, but careless with medication wasn't one of them. She organized her prescriptions meticulously, complete with labeled containers and smartphone alerts. "That's reassuring," I said. "I was concerned it might have been something at the party. That would have been dreadful." "Oh no." "Definitely not," Diane responded quickly. "The doctors were very clear it wasn't food poisoning. Just one of those unfortunate incidents." Interesting how rapidly she wanted to discourage any investigation into what occurred at my home. Almost as if she feared someone might analyze the remaining champagne. After hanging up, I examined the bottle Diane had opened for the party, still 3/4 full, sitting innocently on my counter. I contemplated having it tested at a laboratory. Not that I needed proof for myself. I knew what I'd witnessed, but evidence might prove useful later. My doorbell chimed at 9:30. Andrew stood on my porch holding a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, projecting the image of the concerned son. "Thought you might want breakfast," he said, kissing my cheek. "You probably didn't eat much yesterday after everything that happened." I invited him in and brewed fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries on a plate. Watching him move around my kitchen, opening cabinets he'd known since childhood, reaching for sugar without asking where it was kept, I experienced a peculiar sadness. This was still my little boy, who once brought me dandelions and proudly displayed his elementary school artwork on my refrigerator. When had that child transformed into a man who stood by while his wife attempted to murder his mother? "How are you holding up, Mother?" he asked, settling across from me at the breakfast table. "Oh, you know me. It takes more than a little excitement to unsettle these old bones." He smiled, but his eyes remained cold. "That's what worries me." An odd comment. I sipped my coffee and waited. "The thing is," Andrew continued, picking at a pastry, "Diane and I have been discussing your situation." "My situation?" "You're 72, Mother. Living alone in this enormous house, managing all that money from the company sale." He gestured vaguely. "It just seems excessive for one person to handle." There it was, the setup for whatever they had planned next. "I appreciate your concern, darling, but I've been managing quite well so far." Andrew leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Have you, though? I mean, yesterday's incident with Eleanor. What if that had been you? What if you'd collapsed and no one found you for hours?" The audacity was breathtaking. He was using their failed murder attempt as justification for why I needed their protection. "Andrew, Eleanor collapsed at a party surrounded by 40 witnesses, and emergency services arrived within minutes. That's hardly a cautionary tale about living alone." "That's not what I meant." He ran his fingers through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his adolescence when he was about to request something he knew I'd refuse. "Look, Diane and I have been researching. There are some exceptional communities for active seniors places, where you'd have people around. Activities, medical staff on site. Ah, the retirement home strategy. How convenient they'd already been investigating options for me. How thoughtful, I said. And I suppose you have something specific in mind? Actually, yes. He displayed a glossy website on his phone. Golden Horizons. It's only 15 minutes from our house, so we could visit frequently. They have a golf course, spa facilities, cultural programs. It's more like a resort than a retirement community. I studied the images of smiling elderly people engaged in card games and water aerobics. Everyone looked so peaceful and contented, probably because they were heavily medicated. The only issue, Andrew continued, is there's usually a waiting list, but if someone wanted immediate placement, they'd need to pay the full entrance fee up front. It's substantial, about $500,000, but covers everything. Housing, meals, medical care for life. $500,000. That would make a nice dent in my liquid assets. And once I was safely tucked away in Golden Horizons, who would have power of attorney over the remaining $26.5 million? Who would be making decisions about my care and finances? It sounds delightful, I said. But I'm quite content here. This house holds so many memories of your father. Mother, Dad's been gone 12 years. Don't you think it's time to begin a new chapter? The gentle concern in his voice made my heart ache. If I hadn't witnessed what I'd seen last night, I might have actually considered his suggestion. My son worried about his aging mother. Wanting to ensure she was safe and cared for. It would have been touching. Instead, it was terrifying. I'll consider it, I said finally. It's a significant decision. Andrew's relief was visible. Of course. Take all the time you need. Maybe we could tour the facility next week. Perhaps. I should call Eleanor today. Make sure she's recovering. Actually, Mother, Diane mentioned that Eleanor probably needs to rest for several days. The doctor advised against visitors while she recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence is eliminated from her system, and she can't recall details clearly. After Andrew departed, I sat in my study contemplating timing. They'd waited until after I sold the company to make their move. Strategic. If I'd died 6 months earlier, the $27 million would have gone to Andrew through my will anyway. But as a gift from a living person, it faced different tax implications. Eliminating me now, especially if they could manufacture signs of declining mental capacity first, would give them grounds to challenge any recent changes to my estate planning. My phone rang. My attorney, Jonathan Pierce, returning a call I'd made earlier. Victoria, good to hear from you. How was the retirement celebration? Eventful, I said. Jonathan, I need to see you soon. Is everything all right? I gazed out my study window at the garden my husband had planted 15 years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully, despite having no one to tend them, but an elderly woman who apparently couldn't be trusted to manage her own affairs. I'm not certain, I replied, but I believe I'm about to find out. Jonathan Pierce had been my attorney for 25 years, which meant he'd guided me through my husband's death, the expansion of my business, and every major decision since. A slim, precise man who kept his emotions carefully controlled. Jonathan was exactly the kind of lawyer you wanted when you suspected your family was trying to kill you. His office overlooked downtown from the 18th floor, all dark wood and leather, furnishings designed to inspire confidence. I'd always felt secure here, surrounded by law books and the subtle aroma of expensive cologne. Tell me everything, Jonathan said after his secretary brought us coffee and closed the door. I recounted every detail from the party. Eleanor's collapse, Andrew's visit that morning. Jonathan listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on his legal pad. You're certain about what you observed? He asked when I finished. As certain as I am sitting in this chair. Jonathan leaned back, tapping his pen against his lips. The challenge is proving intent. Diane could claim she was adding something harmless to the champagne. A supplement. A flavoring agent. Something benign. Without testing the remaining champagne, we have no evidence of attempted murder. Then let's test it. If we find poison, we have proof she attempted to harm someone. But we still can't prove she specifically targeted you. She could argue she was targeting her own mother for insurance money, or that it was meant for someone else entirely. I hadn't considered that angle. So even with proof of poisoning, they might escape a murder charge. Attempted murder, possibly. But Victoria, there's something else we need to discuss. Jonathan's expression turned grave. If they're willing to kill you for your money, they might try other approaches first. Legal challenges to your competency, for instance. On what grounds? Your age, living alone, the stress of selling your company. If they can establish a pattern of declining judgment or mental capacity, they could petition for guardianship. Once they control your person, they control your assets. Their retirement home suggestions suddenly made perfect sense. Get me isolated, surrounded by medical professionals who might document signs of confusion or cognitive decline, especially if those professionals were being generously compensated for their observations. What should I do? Jonathan opened a file drawer and extracted a thick folder. First, we document your current mental state. I'll arrange for you to be evaluated by a geriatric neurologist who specializes in competency assessments for elderly clients. Get that on record immediately. And then? Then we get creative with your estate planning. Jonathan's smile was sharp. If Andrew and Diane want to play games with your money, let's ensure they're playing by your rules. We spent the next 3 hours reviewing options, trust structures that would make it difficult for anyone to challenge my decisions, medical directives specifying exactly who could and couldn't make healthcare decisions on my behalf, financial arrangements that would trigger automatic audits if anyone attempted to access my accounts without proper authorization. There's one more thing, Jonathan said as I prepared to leave. Given what you've told me about last night, I think you should consider your personal safety. If they tried once, they'll try again, probably more carefully next time. I thought about Andrew's suggestion that I stay with them last night. How convenient that would have been. A grieving widower distraught over a friend's sudden illness. Perhaps taking a sedative to help her sleep. So easy for an elderly woman to accidentally take too many pills. What do you recommend? Security cameras for starters. Motion sensors. A panic button system. I can recommend a company that specializes in protection for high net worth individuals. High net worth individuals. That's what I was now, apparently. Rich enough to kill for. Driving home, I found myself studying every vehicle in my rearview mirror, wondering if I was being followed. Paranoia, probably. But as my husband used to say, it's not paranoia if they're really after you. My phone rang as I pulled into my garage. Diane. Victoria. I wanted to let you know Mom's home from the hospital. She's feeling much better, though she doesn't remember much about last night. The doctor said that's normal with this kind of episode. How perfectly convenient. I'm so glad she's all right. I'd love to visit her tomorrow. Oh, she's really not up for visitors yet. Maybe in a few days. I'll keep you posted. Of course, dear. Please tell her I'm thinking of her. After hanging up, I sat in my car for several minutes, gazing at the house I'd called home for 35 years. My husband and I had purchased it when Andrew was 12, full of dreams about family gatherings and holiday celebrations. The mortgage had been challenging then, but we'd been young and optimistic, certain that everything would work out. Now it felt like a fortress under siege. But I'd been in business long enough to know that sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. to show my family what a 72-year-old woman was truly capable of. The security company arrived at 8 the next morning. 3 technicians in unmarked vans who devoted the day to installing cameras, motion detectors, and a panic button system that could summon police within 3 minutes. I told the neighbors I'd been experiencing problems with package theft, a plausible explanation in any suburban neighborhood. By afternoon, my home was better protected than most jewelry stores. But the real security came from the envelope Jonathan's courier delivered at 2 o'clock. My updated will, trust documents, and medical directives, all properly witnessed and notarized. If Andrew and Diane wanted my money, they'd have to wait for it, and they'd receive considerably less than they anticipated. The new will reduced Andrew's inheritance from everything to a modest trust fund that would pay him $60,000 annually for life, sufficient to live comfortably, but inadequate to maintain their current lifestyle. The majority of my estate would go to cancer research, with smaller amounts to several charitable organizations I'd supported over the years. As for Diane, she received nothing, not a penny. I'd never particularly liked the woman, but I tolerated her for Andrew's sake. Attempted murder, however, was where I drew the line. I was reviewing the documents one final time when my doorbell rang. Through the security monitor, I could see Andrew and Diane standing on my front porch, both looking rather grim. "Mother, we need to talk," Andrew said when I opened the door. "Of course, darling. Come in." They settled in my living room. Diane perched on the edge of the sofa, as if she might need to flee at any moment. Andrew surveyed the room, his gaze lingering on the new security camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked. "Package theft," I replied smoothly. "You can't be too careful these days." Diane cleared her throat. "Victoria, we've been thinking about what happened the other night with Mom's incident." "Yes. Well, it's just that we feel terrible about having the party here. If something we provided caused her to become ill." She trailed off, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. I observed this performance with professional appreciation. Diane had clearly been rehearsing. "I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, dear." "But what if it was?" Andrew leaned forward. "What if there was something wrong with the champagne or the food? Mother, I'd never forgive myself if we'd accidentally put you in danger." Here it came, the setup for whatever they planned next. "The point is," Diane said, "we think it might be better if we took care of you for a while. Just until we're sure you're safe." "Took care of me? How?" "Well, you could stay with us," Andrew suggested. "Just temporarily, until we determine what happened the other night." I allowed the silence to expand, watching their expressions. Andrew appeared genuinely concerned. He'd always been skilled at convincing himself his motivations were pure. Diane looked like a woman whose credit card payment was overdue. "That's very thoughtful," I said finally. "But I'm perfectly secure here." "Are you, though?" Diane's voice acquired an edge. "You're 72 years old, Victoria, living alone. What if something happens and no one finds you for days?" The same argument Andrew had presented yesterday. They were following a script. "What if you have a fall?" Andrew added, "or a heart attack?" "Mother, at your age, anything could happen." At my age. As if 72 meant I was already deceased and simply hadn't realized it yet. "You know," I said thoughtfully, "you're absolutely right. Anything could happen at my age. That's precisely why I spent today updating my will." The temperature in the room plummeted about 10 degrees. "Your will?" Diane's voice was carefully neutral. "Oh, yes. It's remarkable how a brush with mortality, even someone else's, makes you reconsider these matters. I realized my previous will was terribly outdated. Andrew's complexion had paled. What kind of updates?" I smiled at him, the same smile I'd employed when he was 9 years old, and, I'd caught him lying about breaking my favorite vase. Just some minor adjustments to reflect my current priorities. You understand how these things go. The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear their minds racing, trying to determine how severely their plans had just been disrupted. Well, Diane said finally, her voice strained, I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best. I believe so too. Dear. They left shortly afterward, promising to check on me soon. I watched through my security monitor as they sat in their vehicle in my driveway for 15 minutes, engaged in what appeared to be an intense discussion. Then Diane made a phone call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing angrily. Andrew repeatedly attempted to take the phone from her, and she kept pushing his hand away. When they finally drove away, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite armchair. Tomorrow I would implement phase 2 of my plan. But tonight, I was going to enjoy the first peaceful evening I'd had in days. After all, there's something deeply satisfying about watching your enemies realize they've underestimated you. The game was just beginning, and I'd been playing it far longer than they had. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Eleanor Carlson stood on my doorstep looking pale but determined, clutching a small handbag like a lifeline. Victoria, I need to speak with you, she said without preamble. It's about the other night. I invited her in and prepared tea, studying her face for signs of the poisoning. She appeared tired but alert, certainly more coherent than her daughter would have wanted me to believe. Diane told me I had some kind of reaction to medication, Eleanor said, settling into my living room chair. But Victoria, I don't take any medications except vitamins. Haven't for years. Interesting. What do you remember about the party? Everything until I started feeling dizzy. I remember the champagne tasting strange, bitter, almost metallic. And I remember seeing Diane near the drinks table earlier doing something with a small bottle. My pulse quickened. What kind of bottle? Like a dropper bottle, the kind used for essential oils or tinctures. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. Victoria, I think my daughter tried to poison you. Why would you think that? Eleanor's laugh was bitter. Because she's been discussing your money for months. How unfair it is that you have so much while they struggle. How much easier their lives would be if something happened to you. The pieces were falling into place. Has she said anything specific? Last month, she asked if I thought you'd updated your will recently. She seemed very concerned about Andrew's inheritance. Eleanor met my gaze. Victoria, I think they've been planning this for some time. I made a decision. Eleanor deserved to know what her daughter had attempted, and I needed an ally who'd witnessed their behavior firsthand. Eleanor, I saw Diane put something in my champagne glass. I switched our drinks deliberately. The color drained from her face. She tried to kill you, and I nearly died instead. Yes. We sat in silence for a moment, processing the magnitude of what had occurred. What are you going to do? Eleanor asked finally. I'm going to give them exactly what they want, I said. Just not in the way they expect to receive it. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. What does that mean? It means your daughter and my son are about to learn that some games have higher stakes than they realized. After Eleanor left, I called an old business contact. Patricia Williams operated a private investigation firm specializing in corporate espionage and background checks. We'd collaborated several times over the years when I needed information about potential business partners. Victoria Wilson. Patricia's voice was warm through the phone. I heard about your company's sale. Congratulations. Thank you, Patricia. I need a favor. A personal one. What kind of favor? I need to know everything about my son's finances. Bank accounts, credit cards, loans, investments, everything. There was a pause. Victoria, are you certain? Sometimes family information can be uncomfortable. I'm certain. Give me 48 hours. While Patricia conducted her investigation, I implemented the next phase of my plan. I called Andrew and asked him to meet me for lunch at our favorite restaurant. The place we'd celebrated his architecture school graduation, his wedding, Olivia's birth. He arrived looking nervous, constantly checking his phone. "How are you feeling, Mother? You sounded upset when you called." "I've been reflecting on what you and Diane suggested about my safety, about planning for the future." His expression brightened. "And I think you're right. I believe it's time to make some changes." Andrew leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been researching Golden Horizons, the community you mentioned. I contacted them this morning." "That's wonderful, Mother. I think you'll really enjoy it there. They do have an opening, but it needs to be claimed quickly. Someone else is interested in the same unit." "How quickly?" "Next week. I need to pay the entrance fee by Friday to secure it." Andrew's excitement was palpable. "That's not a problem, is it? You have the money from the sale." "Of course. It's just, well, it's a significant step. I thought perhaps you and Diane could help me with the paperwork. Ensure I'm making the right decision." "Absolutely. We'd be happy to assist." I smiled at my son, memorizing his expression. In a few days, that eager look would transform into something very different. "There's just one thing," I added casually. "The facility requires all residents to have a power of attorney on file. Someone to make decisions if they become unable to. I was hoping you'd be willing to accept that responsibility." "Of course, Mother. Whatever you need." "Perfect." Andrew believed he was maneuvering me into giving him control of my money. Instead, he was walking directly into my trap. Patricia called Thursday morning with her report. I listened in growing astonishment as she detailed Andrew and Diane's financial situation. It was worse than I'd imagined. "They're leveraged to the limit," Patricia said. "The house has been refinanced 4 times. They have 2 mortgages plus a home equity line of credit that's maximized. Credit card debt exceeding $120,000. How have they been making minimum payments?" "Barely. Andrew's business has been operating at a loss for 3 years. They've been using one credit card to pay others. Classic signs of financial desperation. Anything else?" "Diane took out a life insurance policy on you 8 months ago. $750,000 with herself listed as beneficiary." My blood turned to ice. "How is that legal?" "She claimed insurable interest as your daughter-in-law and caregiver. The insurance company probably assumed Andrew was the actual beneficiary, and Diane was merely handling the paperwork." "A life insurance policy. They've been planning my death for months, not days." "There's one more thing, Victoria. Andrew's been making regular payments to someone named Dr. Lawrence Sullivan, a geriatric psychiatrist." "For what?" "I'm not certain yet, but the payments began 4 months ago. Small amounts, like consultation fees." "Dr. Lawrence Sullivan. I made a note to ask Jonathan about him." That afternoon, Andrew and Diane arrived at my house with a briefcase full of paperwork for Golden Horizons. They spread the documents across my dining room table, like generals planning a campaign. "This is the admission contract," Diane explained, indicating a thick stack of papers. "And this is the financial disclosure form. It lists all your assets, so they can calculate your monthly fees." "It's very thorough," I observed, scanning the documents. "They'd want access to all my accounts, all my investments, everything." "The power of attorney paperwork is here," Andrew added, sliding another document toward me. "It's pretty standard. Just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't." I carefully read through the power of attorney document. It was far more comprehensive than Andrew had suggested. With this signature, he'd have immediate access to my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the authority to make any financial decisions on my behalf. This seems quite broad, I said. Do I really need to grant you this much authority? Mother, it's just a precaution, Andrew assured me. The facility requires it, and honestly, at your age, it's sensible to have someone younger managing the complicated financial matters. At my age. There was that phrase again. What if I change my mind about Golden Horizons? I asked. Can this be revoked? Andrew and Diane exchanged a quick glance. Well, technically yes, Diane said. But the facility has strict policies about residents who attempt to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. It's complicated. Of course it was. Once I signed these papers and moved to Golden Horizons, they'd control my money and could make it extremely difficult for me to leave, especially if Dr. Lawrence Sullivan was prepared to evaluate my mental competency. I need to consider this overnight, I said, gathering the papers. It's a significant decision. Andrew's face fell. Mother, remember we need to submit everything by tomorrow if you want to secure the unit. I understand. I'll have an answer for you in the morning. After they left, I called Jonathan Pierce.